time you were on the show?
I think it was about a year ago. I had a short story collection out that was getting some good reviews, and we chatted about that. Then we inevitably wound up also chatting about my love for Zane Grey and the best possible rare books I can get with Zane Grey. I've got a whole stack of them here. Should that come into the conversation, we can talk.
All right, we'll see if we got time for that. If not today, certainly on Saturday.
Yeah, maybe on Saturday.
You've made it through the pandemic vertical.
Yeah, the pandemic was worrisome. I have a Down syndrome son, and I was very worried about him. But we finally got everybody in the family fully vaccinated about 6 weeks ago, and that has really helped. Yeah.
Great.
Good right.
Good to all of you. Well, Rick, you're here to talk to us about science fiction. You are an award-winning science fiction writer, short story writer, journalist, poet. Of all of those nom de plumes, where do you lie? Are you a science fiction writer?
I just answered this question for an interview with a website in Finland. This very question, and it's how I got started. I began.
I assure you, we did not collaborate on that. I don't even know if Finnish has 2 N's or 3.
2. I began as a journalist and as a sports writer. I'm from a sports family. My father played Major League Baseball, and my brothers were minor league baseball players. I played 3 different sports, college scholarship sports. And so I had always been a heavy reader. And when I decided I'd be a writer, I naturally turned to sports writing. Sports writing led me into newspaper journalism, and I was very happy there for a number of years. But I had always read science fiction books as a kid, and I never stopped. By the time I was in my late 20s, I thought, what I really want to do is I want to write science fiction. I'm happy to write mainstream literary fiction. I'm happy to do other things, but what I really want to do is write science fiction.
What is science fiction? And where did it begin?
Science fiction, generally, modern science fiction is said to begin with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And because it's using science as a crucial element to tell a story. And science is certainly as they knew it or thought they knew it in the 19th century. So from there, science fiction goes forward.
The next big leap was probably Jules Verne.
Jules Verne and H.G. Wells were the next 2 names everyone would recognize. And Wells was even more concerned with scientific accuracy. Jules Verne, I think, was more concerned with great storytelling and conjured up whatever science he might think he could get away with to do that. But H.G. Wells was very concerned with the science of the day.
I'm sorry, continue. What's the difference between science fiction and fantasy, and are there other subgenres that kind of have a Venn diagram?
There is, and there are a number of genres within this general area: horror, science fiction, fantasy, different kinds of fantasy, urban fantasy, high fantasy, different kinds of science fiction, hard science fiction, soft science fiction. And all of these things come together under a general term we sometimes use called speculative fiction, which is fiction that is not tied to the world as we know it now, but is very speculative in nature. And sometimes
you're talking 4th dimensional things?
Yeah, everything. Time travel, multiple dimensions. I've written a lot of time travel and multiple dimension stories. There's some pretty good scientific evidence talking about the multiverse, which is there might be realities right next to ours that we don't know about them, and they may or may not know about us.
You can
travel between those. Yeah, there's a lot of that's sort of a major element of quantum physics, is the possibilities of those neighboring realities, multiverses.
Okay,
And
Rick, I got one for you that I know the guys from Finland didn't ask. Have you ever written about anything in one of your books? Have you ever invented anything in one of your books that has yet to materialize?
I have, I think, and I think it might be materializing right now. I have in the current novel, and in a world that I pulled the current novel from, that I've written a lot of novellas and a couple of other novels in. There's a thing I call a sweep system, where the celebrity or the athlete or whoever it is, she or he has a system either connected through the scalp or connected through what are called haptic gloves. And if you connect to them, it's like you're inside their head. You're seeing what they see, you're tasting, you're touching what they touch.
Oh my.
You're sensing it, and that is happening. That is starting to happen right now. I just wrote a piece for the Sabre Society's magazine. Sabre is the Society for American Baseball Research. They're the statisticians in baseball, and they love numbers, but they want to know what baseball might be like in the future. And I said, what if you could just put on a headset and you felt you were the pitcher, and you felt like you were inside that pitcher as the pitcher is staring down to get the pitch from the catcher, to get the sign. And what if you're the hitter and you're watching a 95-mile-an-hour fastball go by? What if you're the hitter and you get hit by a pitch? Yikes. So it would really hurt that player, but it wouldn't really hurt you, but you would feel it. Right. Yeah. So
that's fascinating concept.
Yeah. That sort of thing. I think we're not very far from having all the technology we need to do that. So I claim it. I claim it.
I get a patent in on that quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who are your science fiction? Yours. Okay, so we've got Mary Shelley and then H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. But who are when you were that kid picking up a book? Who were you reading?
Yeah. When I was a kid, I read all the stuff you read if you were a kid in the 50s. I read the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, the Bobbsey Twins, Tom Swift Jr., which led me into Tom Swift Sr., his dad, Rick Brandt, a lot of those things. And those eventually led me into the juvenile novels of Robert Heinlein.
Oh, yeah.
And the juvenile novels of Isaac Asimov, who wrote under the juvenile name. He wrote under the name for those books of Paul French. And it was just a progression. I read constantly as a kid. And that led me into Arthur C. Clarke. And then by the 60s, late 60s, into Ursula Le Guin. And as the field expanded, I was sort of busily expanding with it. I would say my big hero in high school was a guy named Walter Miller, who wrote a book called A Canticle for Leibowitz, which is a post-apocalypse where a group of monks are keeping alive the knowledge that had existed before society fell apart. And it
sounds a little bit like the Glass Speed game.
Yeah.
Ludi.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's a lot like the actual Irish monks were off the coast of Ireland, keeping it alive. And Walter Miller wrote this book, and it was a huge success. It got mainstream success. The mainstream critics loved it, and then he didn't do a lot else for a long time. And later in the 1990s, when I was working at the Lakeland Ledger, or the Tampa Tribune. I think the Tampa Tribune. I was working as a journalist, and I got the assignment to go interview Walter Miller himself. And he lived in Daytona Beach, and I went to interview him, and it was so exciting. I grew up in a baseball family. My father was a major league player with the Red Sox and the Phillies and the Cardinals. And so the normal child's heroes, the baseball players, were just my dad's friends. That didn't, we had dinner at Ted Williams' house, and that didn't mean anything to me as a kid.
Oh my goodness.
But I was
Rick, one more question before we let you go. We didn't mention, I mean, you've been a professor at a number of universities, have had a lot of students come through your classrooms. What's the best advice? Distill it down. What do you tell your students? For those budding novelists out there that are putting pen to paper, someone said to me, if you had to give advice to the next generation in 3 words, what would it be? And I replied, floss. Twice daily.
Floss is good. Floss
But what
is good.
what would you recommend to a budding science fiction writer?
I would say read heavily the kind of fiction that you want to write, so that you know what's been done and where it's going and what it's doing now, and then write it, and expect to perhaps not be an overnight success, but stop talking about it and write it and submit it and send it in and try to sell it, try to get an agent interested, and go through the whole process that we all have to go through. And
you mean hard work?
Hard work, and rejection. I always tell students you have to embrace rejection, because the other thing, if you don't embrace rejection as part of the learning process, you'll wind up quitting. and that's a good way to avoid. They won't reject stories they never see, so that's how you can avoid rejection. But they'll never publish them either. So,
all right, Rick, we're looking forward to seeing you this Saturday, 12:30 Eastern Time on the Rare Book Cafe, the Book Lovers Rendezvous.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, keep smiling.
I will. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.